systems. So they will also be talking about support system and talking about counseling options that can help us with hearing loss, because it is grief, and we do go through the 5 stages of grief. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce today's speaker. 2 of our speakers. The first one, we have Gloria. Gloria is a licensed clinical social worker, and she is a licensed substance abuse counselor. She is a trained therapist and advocate with more than 30 years of experience. From an early age, she has had an untreated and unrecognized hearing loss. And so in her life, she learned how to deal with communications, and she searched for a variety of different options to bring quality of life, just to enhance it for herself. And her advocacy is really teaching other people to do that for themselves too. So our other speaker is Chelle Wyatt, and Chelle is a hearing aid user of 30 years plus. In the first 17 years of wearing hearing aids, everyone thought that her hearing aids, just wearing hearing aids, it meant that she was fixed, including herself. And so with her with her hearing loss, it has really enhanced her life, and she volunteers for both the Say What Club and HLAA SLC for the last 13 years of her life. She's taken on a variety of roles, and for Walk for Hearing, which she co-chairs. She is on the steering committee. She's a member, president, and treasurer. She also is one of the founders of Hearing Loss Live, and Hearing Loss Live has a blog, a website, and a Facebook page. Welcome, and we are delighted to have you today.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Actually, I have a sister who lives in Las Vegas, New Mexico, so I'm hoping to go through that area sometime in the summer, and when I do, I hope to meet some people for coffee. I'm going to let Gloria begin because this is kind of her baby.
Thank you. When my hearing took a very deep dive, and I found that I could no longer communicate. I no longer could communicate with my own community. I couldn't communicate with my family. And I had a very harsh reality check. And I developed some grief, actually a lot of grief, and some depression over that. And in order to deal with that, I had to do a lot of research. And when I started doing the research, I realized that there wasn't very much talking about people who had hearing loss and who had grief. And there's various models that we could use to talk about it. Most everybody knows Kubler-Ross's models, 5 stages of grief. But sometimes what we forget is that grief isn't a stage. It's a continuous emotional state that has a spiral to it. You spiral down and you spiral up, and you find that you think you're all done and you got it, and something happens and it pushes you right back. And unfortunately, most people don't treat that very well because they don't understand it. So what we wanted to talk about is that it's a statement that I made in one of the podcasts that came back to me, and I thought it was just nothing, but it seemed to resonate with people. I will always be adjusting. That's okay. I'm always learning constantly how to communicate and how to change my communication. I think we don't realize that it is always going to be an adjustment. We're used to our life. We're used to how we're dealing with it. We're used to how we communicate with people. And all of a sudden, we can't do that anymore. Or it might be a slow gradual. And what happens to people is when you have that major loss, and it is a major loss, we don't know how to cope because we've never been taught. It's not something we talk about in our communities. It's not something we talk about in school. Or I didn't even get that when I was going through graduate school and even after graduate school. And so what I learned is that sometimes we have to be our own best advocate. We cannot depend on those people who were professionals and are professionals to help us because sometimes they don't know. And what I wanted to say to that is that sometimes puts us in a stasis, a static place. And to come out of that, we need the help of our community. And Chelle talks about the tribe. We have to have support. And that's what this HLAA groups are about, is coming together and supporting each other. What I wanted to also say is sometimes the first time that you recognize that you're no longer communicating the way you want to, it's a huge shock. It's a shock to everything. It's a shock to you, to your system, to your family, to those people who are part of your resources. And oftentimes nobody knows how to help. And that creates a tremendous amount of stress. And because we don't have that knowledge, because it's not readily available, oftentimes people will sink into a melancholy, depression. And what we wanted to talk about, and part of our presentation today, is strategies. Because once you learn that you don't have to be stuck in this place, it helps the grief process a lot. And one of the hardest parts for me was recognizing that I had places to learn. Shelle's group really brings it to fruition that we have people that can help us. And in the town I was in, there was nobody to help for people who are hard of hearing. And in Prescott, it's true also, we don't have an HLA chapter. We don't have a Say What club. It's very isolated. So I had to search out people, and that's what I did. One of the things that people don't talk, there's two things that people don't talk about. There is a complicated grief. And sometimes I feel that we have a complicated grief. You may have other issues going on, and then we layer on top of that our hearing loss. And it just makes it that much harder. And what most people don't understand is when you layer the hearing loss on top of whatever else is happening, it really does complicate it. So it goes into the complicated grief arena. And then there's anticipatory grief. Sometimes when we lose our hearing, we also lose our dreams, and we lose our financial, like I couldn't work anymore. We lose our relationships because they don't understand when you guys will know this, when you think you hear what you thought you heard and it wasn't anything close to what you heard, and they're like, what'd she say? And usually that's a time for laughter for me, because then I realize I really did not hear what they said. But sometimes my inner life is very rich. And it's a loss of these that causes a lot of grief. And to be in grief, sorry, I mispronounced that. It's not recognized. It's not recognized that sometimes when we are speaking with somebody and we misunderstand the question or the comment, or the topic, and we respond in a way that we think is okay, and they're looking at you like, what did you say? And you know that you missed it. And for some people, that can be really, really frustrating to them, especially with family, because we have a expectation in our families, and we can't always meet those expectations. And some of the problem with, excuse me while I look at my notes. Chelle, I wanted you to talk about what happens within the car, because we're going to kind of look at different scenarios, and most of you are going to be aware of this, and most of you will have come up with workarounds for that. But Chelle was just relating something to me about when she was in the car, and I thought it was really a good example of why some people who are still in the grieving process, it gets deeper.
Yes, you just dread the car ride sometimes because you know you're not going to hear well. That's kind of an anticipatory type of thing too. You know, it's a building up of things. Well, I recently lost about 20% of word discrimination in my right ear. So when I'm driving, I can't hear my husband anymore without him looking at me. And usually he does the driving and I can watch him. So I can face him, lip read, really focus on hearing. Well, he's not used to being the passenger so much, where it's very difficult for me to hear now. We, like 5 times, I had to remind him, if you're going to say something, you have to face me and speak up, make sure I hear you, because I'm just hearing noise. Otherwise, the vehicle is very noisy also. So, finally, it collapsed. Communication collapsed. And he brought up the term collateral damage, which is another thing that Gloria and I talk about, and Julia and I talked about several months ago, several. Anyway, so the collateral damage to him is he can't chat in the car anymore. He's feeling the grief of losing that casual communication in the car, and now it's going to take effort. And for me, that's a total grief too. But I reminded him that my effort is probably 10 times more than what he has to do. So there was a really quiet trip home the other day, which is unusual for us because of driving. So there was some grief just the other day, and no matter how experienced I am, it's going to happen.
And I like that, Chelle, because sometimes those of us who've had hearing loss for a long time have adapted. But then if our hearing takes another dive, or whatever word you want to use, another loss, we have to adapt all over again, because we were used to hearing those sounds and now we can't. And I've heard people tell me, I'm afraid to live alone. I sleep on the couch with my lights on. I can't hear the doorbell. I can't hear if there's somebody is going to attack me. I can't hear if something is wrong in the house. And it causes a tremendous amount of anxiety. And that anxiety shows up oftentimes looking like grief. And there is grief around that, because you are a fully functioning adult. And for the new person who loses their hearing, they don't feel like they are. And so that's why the groups like you guys have are so important, because you can help them understand. You can help them know that there is another life out there. And that's the hardest part to accept for a lot of people. And when we're working with a lot of people, even if they've had a long history of hearing loss, we have become technologically dependent. I'm very dependent on my technology to communicate. If I didn't have my hearing aids, I didn't have my computer, I didn't have the special equipment, I didn't have the lighting, all the stuff that I need to communicate now, I couldn't communicate. I couldn't do my job. I couldn't be where I am right now. And that is another loss, because I have a watch that tells me if something's going off in the house. I'm dependent on my watch when I go out into the community. There's a loss of independence. It feels like there's a loss of independence, and that's a grief. But it isn't a loss of independence. It's a way to adapt. But sometimes when we're really feeling down, it doesn't feel like that. And so how do we find our way out of that? And that's one of the things that I think I wanted to talk about, because I think we all sort of understand what grief looks like. And how do we come out of that? How do we work ourselves to a place where it becomes, and I'm not sure that we ever stop grieving it, but I think we can learn to work with it. And one of the things that I had to learn is when I lip read and I sign, but most people don't sign. So I'm lip reading somebody and I'm getting really close. And I'm getting closer than they're comfortable with, because in America we have this, 6 feet distance thing. And then I'm staring at their lips and it upsets people. And I'm like, why are you upset? And like, you're staring at me. And I'm like, yeah, I am. Because if I can't read your lips, even though I have my hearing aids, they're not a panacea. I need other techniques to help me to communicate. And that's something that in America we have a taboo. You're not supposed to stare. And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to stare at you. So that is really, can be, I call it a little indignities. Because if we don't understand, if the person who is on the receiving end of the communication doesn't understand that in order for you to cope, they're going to withdraw a little bit. And that's another grief. You don't even know sometimes why they're withdrawing, but they are. And then when you tell them about it, it takes them a little bit to adjust. We can't expect immediate adjustment. And sometimes, this is one of the things that I really wanted to point out. Healing isn't a one-time deal. It's a everyday thing. Sometimes I feel like, oh, I've got it down pat. I know how to do all the strategies. I know how to talk, and I know how to have receptive communication now. I have expressive communication. I don't have receptive communication. I've learned to do all that, and it all fails. It all fails. And there is that moment of adjustment when I feel great grief, because I used to be a great communicator and now I'm not. And I'm learning techniques. So these little indignities create a kind of background that we have to overcome and change our thinking to do that. Chelle, you were going to talk about, or I have my notes out.
I didn't catch the last word. I'm sorry.
Mark.
Cart.
No, look, it says Mark.
Captions.
Yeah.
Meetings and captions.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, for many years, I sat there at meetings politely without hearing anything or understanding anything, because that was what was expected of me. And that's sort of a grief too. You're sitting there and you're just struggling. I know I was struggling half the time. to not cry, just because I wanted to hear, I wanted to understand, and I wanted to participate, and I couldn't. Then I just got sick of it. And I thought, you know what? I'm not going to just sit here pretty anymore. I'm going to make my accommodations known. And if they can accommodate me, then I'm not going to sit here pretty anymore. I'm going to walk out or say no to the meeting. I have better things to do. I feel better being at home reading a book than in a meeting surrounded by people and not understanding anything. So there's also a kind of a grief in requesting card, an anticipatory sort of grief, because you're going to ask for captions, and they're going to, if they think what it is, they're going to go, oh, you want an ASL interpreter? And I'm like, no. I need card. And you build up a grief requesting things. I do it anyway. I push myself through it. But that's how I kind of pull myself up out of the grief. Okay, I'm going to push through it. And even though I might be uncomfortable and I'm going to have to educate again and again and again, because it's, not just one time. So, and then I get what I want eventually. And every once in a while now, somebody messes up. And I worked at the Utah State Deaf and Hard of Hearing Agency. And sometimes they would forget to request CART for me, but they'd have interpreters, but nobody really speaking. And they wouldn't have assistive listening or something. And they would say, well, come anyway. We'll write notes for you. I'm like, no, I'm not going to. I'm sorry. And they've reported me. But luckily I had a boss that said, well, why should she just sit there and be a secondhand person and not be able to fully participate? And I'll turn it back over to Gloria. Is that it?
Yeah. One of the things I learned from Julia, who's the co-owner of Hearing Loss Live, was when we're using automatic speech recognition and it doesn't translate correctly, and Julia will repeat herself so it translates correctly, so she's arguing with it. So now I've started doing it, and it sounds kind of silly, but we have to find ways to make fun of what's going on. Because if we don't, we're just going to get stuck in this place that's dark. So Chelle has one of my, when I'm just arguing with the ASR because it's not translating correctly. I obviously can't enunciate correctly. And I'm trying to get it to talk to me and tell me what I'm talking about, and it's not doing it. And I'm really frustrated by this point. And then I start laughing, because you have to admit it is really, really funny when you can't get the technology to work. But it can also be really depressing if you really want to give this message and you can't. That hurts. When you really want people to understand you and you can't make them understand you, that hurts. How do you deal with that hurt? That's the big question for most people. And it's individual. I would like to be able to give you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and tell you, if you follow these steps right the way I tell you to, you won't feel this, but it's just not true. I use humor. Some of the things that happened to me because I can't hear are really funny. A recent event happened. It wasn't real funny at the beginning, but it is now. I left my hearing aids home. I was in a hurry. I wanted a sandwich and I stopped to order. And I told her what I wanted. There was a miscommunication, and she gave me a steak. And I was looking at this and I was like, yeah, maybe that's punishment for not wearing my hearing aids, but it also is a daily occurrence for a lot of us. Many people are afraid to go up to the drive-through because to speak into the speaker also requires some receptive language, and they don't have it. They can't hear it. And I've heard many, many people talk about this and how frustrating it is. The simplest answer to that is just go to the window and order. But I've said in meetings where people repetitively couldn't find a solution. And it's really simple, just go up and do it. But still we have a receptive problem because we can't hear a lot of voices. So I have them write it down, or I put it on my phone and I show it to them. Some have menus that they will give you and you can point to them. But still in our society, and I'm not really clear why it's in our society, there's a little bit of shame around that, using the technology to communicate. And it's like we should be able to communicate just by our voice. But that's really not true anymore. We're sitting in this parameter where we have audiences in the room, we have audiences viral, and Chelle and I live in 2 different states, and we're communicating. And to me, that is a miracle and a bonus to the virus. But I could also see it as something sad, because I'm no longer able to communicate at the level I wanted to. We use the word communicate in a different manner than what I learned as a therapist. When you're talking about communication in this environment, we're talking about a way of life. We're talking about being able to fully function as we choose to. And that is not how some people use the word communicate. So I always like to define, when I'm talking to people, not to especially this group, but to most people, when people are talking about communication, we're talking about all types of avenues. Some people sign and speak. Some people read lips. Some people write. Some people are really adroit at their phones. And some people are really adroit, don't use any hearing aids, don't use any technology, and they're still really good at communicating. This is a skill. And we need people like this group to teach us that skill, because it's not taught anywhere. And without the support of people who have hearing loss, we don't often know how to get out of that place. So humor is the way I get out. Chelle comes to my house. I'm talking to her as I'm going out the door. She can't hear me. I forget, because I'm used to talking to people who can hear. And so Chelle's like, Gloria, I can't hear you. Or, Gloria, put your hand away from your mouth. Or, Gloria, and I realized something. It isn't just us who are grieving. It's our partners, it's our family, it's our friends. Oftentimes they forget. I forgot. I know better. I'm walking out of the room talking to Chelle, and I know better. So how much harder must it be for people that we work with every day and we talk to every day? And there is a grief because they want to talk to us too. As much as we miss them, they miss us. And that's not something we talk about very often. I've been really researching it, and they're not talking about that loss of relationships when your communication is interrupted. And they don't talk about the feelings around that. The loss is also our family and our friends, because they miss that energy that goes between us and it's interrupted. One of the things that I learned from Chelle is she says, oh, we'll just work around that. I'm like, do what? And Chelle is like, we'll just work around that problem. Just this. Okay. Try it out. And it works. It doesn't work in every situation, but it works. And that's something that gives us, and I want to emphasize some of the positivity. We have to learn flexibility. And we also have to learn strategies. It's, you have to talk, you learn to communicate. We're cueing our parents what we want. And then that's interrupted. So now I make it a challenge. How am I going to communicate in church? Absolutely nothing for me to hear. There's no looping system. There's no way to be able to lip read. And I can hear the music. I can't understand it. But I still want to be there. And it's a grief. But I want to be there. So what I've done is the reason why I'm in church is to communicate with God. It's not to communicate with the priest, not to communicate with each other. So I changed my thinking. I changed my expectation. I didn't lower my expectation, but I changed my expectations. I want to hear my family tell me, I love you. So my family learned sign language. They go by me and they love you. My grandson would go by me, I love you. So we have to change some of our communication patterns. And doing all this stuff sort of brings us out of our losses because we're supplementing them. We're not lost anymore. I can hear you tell me I love you. Sign it to me. I do that to my friends. They're like, what did you do? And I'm like, love you. So find strategies, find skills to supplement what you lost. And then don't see it as a loss, because I have made more friends since I lost a significant amount of hearing than I ever did before. And it might be because I have to put myself out there. It might be because the people I am associating with now who have hearing loss, in my opinion, are people who have more depth, more understanding, more willingness to communicate and really get it. And until you have to do that, we don't get it. One of the things that Chelle talked about was giving people opportunities to learn to manage their hearing loss. And I never thought about it that way. See, I'm changing how I view the world. I never thought about it. I'm a therapist. I've been a therapist for over 30 years. And I work with people who have hearing loss. And I started to understand that we need to give people the opportunity to express their feelings about their hearing loss. One of the specialties that I do now is people with hearing loss, because very few therapists do it. We've searched all over the US. Chelle, in particular, is going around asking people, are you a therapist? Do you work with hearing loss? So we can find people who do, because it's a different way to function and it's a different way to communicate. And unfortunately, oftentimes people with hearing loss are misdiagnosed, and they're not taken into consideration that the hearing loss produces anxiety. I'm going to say can produce anxiety, can't produce depression, can't produce other symptomology. My daughter asked me one time, Mom, do you have dementia? Well, don't ask somebody if they have dementia. They don't know if they have it. And I said to my daughter, no, I have hearing loss. When you fly by me and you're talking, I don't hear anything but the first word. So I'm guessing. So there's a lot of ways to try to address these issues. And I want people to know that there are ways to address the issues. And it's just like these groups that are making it possible for people to have rich lives. And I don't want to see one more person not go to the store because they don't know how to respond to the grocery clerk. Not go out to eat because they're afraid to order and they'll get the wrong thing. When they go to the doctor, it's misinterpreted. It's going to be upon us to explain it to them. And you can have fun with that. I have fun oftentimes with the doctor. So what I think the message about grief is, yes, it's normal. Yes, we're going to be there. We don't have to stay there. But I think, in my opinion, we will have small little griefs that enter our life every day, but that's part of being human. I did when I could hear a lot better too. So to kind of summarize, I think we're getting to the end, right? Rod, he's someplace. Yeah. So one of the things that I really wanted Chelle to share, because it's such an interesting story, is how when she first learned that she had hearing loss, how she reacted and what she did.
When I was a teenager. Well, I'm pretty sure I started losing my hearing around 14 years old. And I could hear in quiet situations, and I could hear when people were in the same room as me, but noisy situations like the hallways at school, nobody could get my attention. So I was considered stuck up. And then in cars, even back then, I struggled in the back seat of cars where I couldn't hear people. And then there was an instance with my mom who said something from another room, and I was in my bedroom, and I came out of my room saying, "What?" But of course, we're not close enough yet, and neither one of us knew. And so I didn't hear her again. So I said, "What?" And this was about the time we came face to face for the third time. And, I was upset because I was like, I didn't hear. I told her, well, I didn't hear you 2 times, okay? And she was like, ooh, should I slap her? Or is she being, obstinate and difficult, or what? And she did repeat again. And I said, okay. And we went off and did our separate things. So both look back at that. We both remember that. And I was like 17, I think, at that time. We both very clearly remember it was hearing loss. It wasn't being rebellious or I'm a bad teenager.
And oftentimes these children and adults get called oppositional and defiant. And they come and they say, I have this label, it's called oppositional and defiant. And the part of me that's humorous is like, join the club. Because this is part of what happens to people when nobody really understands what hearing loss looks like. And they don't understand how it manifests. And oftentimes these people are really sad. They're like, how can I be called oppositional and defiant when I'm just trying? I'm trying so hard. I don't understand what's happening. And because they don't understand what's happening to them. I'm going to get the wrong word. They're misattributing what's happening to something else. I'll use Chelle for example. Chelle didn't hear mom. Mom's getting frustrated. Chelle's like, what's wrong with mom? You know, and mom is like, Chelle's not paying attention to me. She's acting out. And the truth is Chelle didn't even hear her. And that happens a lot to people. I don't hear. I had my secretary one day come in, she just hit me on the back of my shoulder. And I said, what are you doing? And she goes, you never listen to me. I'm so frustrated. You don't hear me. And I had to start laughing. And I said, were you talking behind my back? And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, well, I'm never going to hear you. You need to come around in front so I can hear you and I can see you. Sorry, I can see you. And that miscommunication was really sad because she was so frustrated and she was hurt because she thought I was ignoring her. I wasn't ignoring her. But unless I have the right cues, I have the right visuals, I'm probably not ever going to hear you. Even with my hearing aids, and they're really top of the line hearing aids. Even if I give you my microphone and you put it here and we're in the car, there's no guarantee I'm going to hear you. My hearing loss is so severe that I am technically deaf. And maybe at some point I will never have any hearing because my hearing is going down, 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 down. And something they don't talk about, my comprehension in speech is like 40%. So 60% of what people say to me, I never hear. I'm guessing. And I took Chelle's speech classes, lip reading classes, and it really helps, but it's not a panacea. I have to use everything in order for me to communicate. Where before I could just talk. I talk, just use my voice. Oops, I don't want to, wrong sign. I just do my voice, right? But now I can't do that. So for some people, that loss creates a lot of depression and grief. And it did for me. For 2 years, I just isolated. I didn't go out. I didn't socialize. My family was stressed. I was stressed. It wasn't worth struggling to communicate. And then little by little, I started learning strategies. And as I learned more strategies, it helped me to accept something that I didn't want to accept. And that is, I will never hear like I did before. There's never going to be a time for me that my hearing will be restored. And that's okay. But it had to take time for me for it to be okay. So when we talk about grief, oftentimes, and I should say that I am also a grief counselor, sometimes in America, not in every country, not in every society, not every culture, we ignore it. We don't allow people to feel that grief. We don't know how to support them when they feel that grief. One day, I had a bunch of IT people at my house to fix my computer, and they were talking to each other, and they had their back to me, and I couldn't understand a word they said. But it's my computer, and I'm a fully grown adult, right? I want to know what's going on with my computer. I want to know how to fix it. And they talked and talked, and then they left, and they didn't tell me what they did. And so I called Chelle, and I said, Chelle, I'm very angry, very frustrated, because these people came into my home, they chatted with each other, but they didn't talk to me. And she said, this is Chelle, just get between them. I said, what? And she said, just get between them. Make them talk to you. Well, that's a strategy I never thought about. I never considered that. and it's a little rude in our society. It's not rude in the deaf society, in the deaf culture, but it is rude in the hearing culture. And so the next time they came out, I said, oh, by the way, remember I can't hear. And remember I have vision problems. And if you talk between yourself, I am excluded. So could you, look at me and talk to me? It was great. And at the end of the meeting, I said, now, can you summarize what you said? Because I'm never clear that I got everything that they said. And it was a great meeting. And I learned a lot. And they learned a lot. But if I had to call Chelle and complain, I would not have known what strategy to use. And I'm a therapist. I'm supposed to know how to do this stuff. But it doesn't always work that way. But, and this is the note I want to leave us on, because we're pretty close to the end of the meeting. I am living a fully functioning life. At one point, I could hear enough that I could get by and lie about it, do the nod. Everybody knows the nod, right? Yeah, I hear you, I hear you, I don't hear a word. And now I can say to people, I can't hear you. And I have vision problems, so I might not see you either. But guess what? I can understand you. And I can communicate if you do certain things. You get in front of me, you talk in front of me, you enunciate a little more clearly. If you talk like this, which my daughter does, she talks to her teeth. Hi, Mom, how are you? So we just have strategies. And I feel like I'm living a great life now. And I get to do these kind of things now. And I also feel that I really want the word out there so people don't have to live the way I did. And it makes me happy to be able to do that. And it makes me happy that there's groups like this that are getting the word out and are helping people like me who didn't have any place to go. So I wanted to leave you with that, and then I'll leave Chelle with the last word.
Actually, we have a question or a statement in the
Do you
chat.
see it?
And it's, a missing piece in this journey is the role of the audiologist or hearing specialist to deal up front at the first session to clue their patient in on what can happen. Now, I think Gloria and I have kicked this around quite a bit. We have, yes, we feel like it should come from the audiologist. They should make us aware. But as we talk to the other therapists and counselors and stuff that we've run across, they all agree that audiologists are not really equipped to deal with the grief. They don't have that training. They can warn you. Now, one of our friends said she was sending people to therapists, but therapists were starting to say no. So that's a whole nother issue. Even therapists are not trained to deal with hearing loss. So it's so frustrating, and no wonder so many of us isolate and are depressed and have anxiety. So I'm gonna let Gloria say a little more on this.
Well, actually, I've had a lot of audiologists, which most people who have hearing loss do. And then I got Dr. McBride, and she was the head of ASU Audiology Clinic. She made a big difference in my life. She spent hours, and I mean literally hours, getting me these hearing aids, oh, you can't see them, that would work for me. And she spent probably 3 to 6 hours the first visit because I had failed so often. And she's contracted with Voc Rehab. So Voc Rehab paid for that. I don't know that your insurance would pay for that, or the other audiologists would be willing to spend that amount of time. And we're doing a class, Dr. McBride and I are developing a class that is talking about audiology rehab, not the way you look at it, not the way people not hearing loss well or living well with hearing loss, not that thing. We're talking about what we're talking about today. We want to get into she does the technical and I do the emotional rehab so that people don't have to live the way I have had to live and other people have had to live. And I'm not saying that all audiologists don't attend to the emotional aspect, but I'm saying that insurance doesn't pay for it. I'm saying that they're not geared for it. They understand it, and often they will refer, but the newest information we're having is what Chelle is saying, that the therapists are refusing the patients. And that was a big shock to me. And so I'm developing a program with Chelle about teaching therapists how to deal with people who have hearing loss and what it looks like. And that's where part of this came out. Grief came out of hours and hours of talk about how we will teach people how to deal with hearing loss. I'm going to look. I'm sorry about the chat. I didn't see it.
It just came up. That's the only one so far. Does anybody
Okay.
from the audience have anything they'd like to share?
Let's see.
Oh, we only see half your face.
We need the audio.
Your audio is missing for us. We can't hear you.
Can't hear you.
I am so sorry.
Oh, we can hear now. Yay!
I specifically came up here and unmuted myself so that it wouldn't be a problem. The first thing I said was that grief is the natural reaction to any kind of loss. And the bigger the loss, the deeper the grief. The second thing that was kind of new to me, it was kind of a revelation, is that everybody who loves you is also losing something. And so they have a grief that may not be as deep. The second thing that occurred to me as I was listening is that communication is a very basic need. And I remember reading several times about people in very oppressive dictatorial societies who will literally risk their lives in order to try to get their story out to the outside world. That's how important communication is to the human being, to the human psyche, to the human soul and heart. So it's not a small thing. And losing the ability to communicate is really, really big deal. But as Gloria pointed out, there are strategies that can be used, and that's excellent. That's very good. Pardon me. Before we get into questions and comments, I'd like to ask John. John, come on up here. And he's got an announcement, a quick announcement he wants to make about, what is it, a bill that's in the Senate right now? Or Okay. Now I want you to stand over here so that people on Zoom can see you.
Okay. All right, everyone. My name is John Cooper, and my name is John Hooper, and I'm the president of the Hearing HLAA chapter in Santa Fe. I've also served on the commissions for the deaf and hard of hearing. And there was a bill in the state legislature House Bill 288. What it does is supposed to mandate all statewide. Okay, and where if you go to restaurants or your doctor's office or the gym, you can see full caption on all the televisions. However, it passed on the House side, but it died on the Senate side because it just only had a few days left. But there were some issues we believe that need to be addressed, probably with the Attorney General's office, with their office going to be enforcing the mandate and or the law. So what do you want, however you want to call it. But we learned, well, I learned that I think we need to communicate with the Attorney General's office how to work together. Since the bill was introduced, we never communicated. So I think that's what we need to do for next legislative session for next year. Okay, and I don't want to take too much of your time. And Rod, thank you for letting me brief this.
Okay, thank you, John. One other thing I want to mention to the live audience is I'm aware that we've had some internet problems today. The problem seems to be with the church's router and system, and we have a possible way of ameliorating that, but it didn't work today because their router is in a locked office. We did not have access to it. So hopefully by next month, we'll be able to make that better. Now, does anybody online have any questions? We ask you that you use the symbol to raise your hand, or go ahead and raise your actual hand, and we'll try to acknowledge you. We do have a question here in the room, so I'm going to turn this around.
We have a question from. Yeah.
Chelle, I'm always asking questions, so Rod knows to get the other people first.
Larry, and I'm going to my name is Larry, and this is my first visit, and I will make it brief. I thank you very much for your presentation, and I thank the people here for the hospitality. My question is rather different from what you were addressing today, and what I would like to know is, I have hearing aids. I know how to, by and large, adjust them. But when I have technical problems, I'd like to know where to go. I would like to find a person other than my audiologist who is not readily available, as most doctors in Albuquerque are. Most of them take weeks, if not months, to see visitors, and I'm getting a little bit frustrated when I have a technical problem, not a strategic problem, not an attitude problem, but a technical problem. I'd like to know where to go. That's my question.
Okay, which one of you wants to try to handle that?
I know the grief with audiologists too, and don't we experience grief with them as well? Sometimes I've had some good ones and I've had some bad ones with 30 plus years of hearing aids. But I think this is, if you want to find somebody local, because I'm in Salt Lake City, Utah, you will have to ask the other members here after the meeting where they go and how supportive their audiologist is, because that's important. I know with my last pair of hearing aids, I was going back every week or 2 weeks for 3 months trying to get it right. And we did finally get it right. And they should always make you feel welcome and encourage program tweaking. The things you can do to help your audiologist or the one you find is to go in with the set of things that you're a list of what you're not hearing and what you're hearing too well and is driving you nuts, keep an active list so that when you go in, the person is better able to program them.
Larry, having watched this group for so long too, find somebody in this group that's got the same brand of hearing aids or multiple people and use them as sort of peer coaches. They won't always have the right answer, but they've worked with that brand. They understand the mechanics. It might be your phone connection, Bluetooth can drop, that kind of stuff. So you use each other. And I'm up in Oregon, and so we've got a peer group like that that helps each other before they go to the doctor or the specialist. And while I've got the floor, may I just say, as a quote, hearing ally, if you will, we have got to get rid of this shyness factor. We just lost Judy Human this last week, who was number one advocate in the country for folks with physical disabilities. We need to get noisy. Take a look at the videos of Crip Camp or look up Capitol Crawl and watch what happened in terms of the noisy advocacy. But you're selling us with hearing abilities short in terms of being allies. I would not allow a board member, actually 3 of them, to leave our board just because they said I can't hear. We fixed the situation so they are full participants. It is not okay to lose that brain trust or your family participation as a society. You've got to stop. It's not rude to get in between. It's rude if you leave because you haven't taught me how to communicate with you. Don't be shy about this. And the humor thing, my background was with kids with severe cognitive and physical disabilities. All of them had different communication things. They couldn't talk, they couldn't see, they couldn't use their fingers, they couldn't communicate. But everybody said, "Oh, you're so patient, dear." It's like, no, we had a wacky sense of humor. The funny stories, it's not laughing at people, it's laughing at the human condition. And we've got to get over the shyness. So I'll be quiet.
Humor is so important. And that is, it's late. Every time I go out and advocate for myself, I will use a little piece of humor somewhere to get people to lighten up and laugh a little bit. Like when Gloria said people are not used to you staring at their mouth. I do a lot of lip reading, okay? Here, I'm getting new hearing aids in a couple of weeks, and I'm so excited because I haven't had the Bluetooth connectivity. But so I haven't been wearing them as much because one's getting staticky and I can't go with just one hearing aid. I start walking around, lopsided. So I'm staring at people's mouths. So, so what I do now is I'm like, oh, there's nothing in your tooth. I use lip reading a lot with what hearing I have left. And then they kind of laugh it off and we go on from there. Yeah, telecoil always. I will have telecoil, Bluetooth. I have it all in my hearing aids. I want all options. I've also learned to live without hearing aids this last 5 years, and I have a severe hearing loss just like Gloria, but I have gotten so good at advocating for myself. I don't experience any troubles. Hey, get my attention, face me, and be within 6 feet. That's with hearing aids, without hearing aids. If you can say those 3 things, you will fare a lot better in the world with communication. I'm shutting up now.
I did want to do one thing wrong. I'm sorry. I forgot to add into my speech this morning or talk is that people who are used to listening to music and they love music and they've heard music and who no longer can hear music, that grief is real. And oftentimes it's dismissed. And I want to put that into every talk I have because For me, I never really heard music. So it wasn't a big deal when I realized I couldn't hear the lyrics, so I couldn't hear anything but the drums or the piano or percussion instruments. But those who do have hearing loss, those who have lost the ability to hear the way they want to hear music, that's a real phenomenon. And I wanted to put that out there so that people know that.
Okay, let's take a little break from question and answer and take care of the birthday book. Bobby? She's coming. Our usual birthday girl is not here this month.
Okay, we offer for people who have birthdays in March, we've got 2 books, and Hear and Beyond and Smart Hearing. Hear and Beyond is by Sherry Eberts and Gail Hannon. Smart Hearing is by Catherine Bouton. Is it Bouton? Okay, Bouton. Okay, and if you have a hearing, or if you have a birthday in March, we'd like to give you a choice of one of these books. Any takers online or? No take, okay. Teresa, you have a birthday in March?
Yes, I do.
And would you like one of these books? Do you have either of them?
I have the Gale one, not interested in that one.
Now this, do you have the first Gale one?
Yeah, I have both of Gale's, not interested.
But do you have?
Yeah, I have that. The other one might be interesting.
Okay.
That one might be interesting, yeah.
Okay. And I'll make sure you get this.
Okay,
Okay, thank you.
thanks.
Anything else?
No, that's it for the birthday book. Are there any other questions or comments from the live audience or from someone online? Ginevra, are you trying to raise your hand?
Yeah, Rod, I just want to say that book, Catherine Bouton, is exactly what we're talking about. She lost her job as an editor at the New York Times because she was too shy to reveal her hearing loss. So think about that. I mean, I just don't think colleagues, they can get sloppy, they can talk behind your back, but they're not mean about it. They're not trying to hide something. And they just need reminding, and you need to be assertive. Doctor, I need to hear, and I'm not going to bring another person in this exam room. You need to tell me clearly what's wrong. You just got to do it. And we need to respond. And we need to bring ADA into the picture if it's not happening.
Excellent. Speaking of the use of humor, I've often said half kiddingly that my wife's hearing loss has saved our marriage multiple times because I get a do-over.
Just
Well,
one quick,
let's thank our speakers this month. Oh, come up and tell them about next month.
Hi, everyone. Next month for April, on April 15th, that is tax day, we are having disaster preparedness. Roger Robb will be joining us speaking about that. And we look forward to that program. Thank you, Gloria, and thank you, Chelle. It was our pleasure having you today.
Okay, I have a specific request for Ginevra. She's still on? I think she logged out already. Okay, well, we'll try that at some other time. Okay, well, thank you very much all for being here, and we look forward to that presentation next month. And thank you, speakers, and thank you, interpreters.